Hello, everybody. Today we're going to learn the next step in the events that led to the American Revolution. This is the story of the battles of Lexington and Concord, and it happened actually on the same day that Paul Revere's ride happened. So let's get started. So this is a map we looked at before. This is the map of Paul Revere and William Dawes. Paul Revere rode in a rowboat across the Boston, part of the Boston Harbor, and then he took this yellow road all the way to this point. Then he got captured and he went by on foot. He went to this place and he let Samuel Adams and John Hancock know that the British were coming and that they needed to get out of there. At the same time, William Dawes went this way, and he went the same way. He got to the same group of soldiers, but he turned around and got away before he got captured. And his friend who was with him, we didn't talk about this last time, this guy in red, this is William Dawes. He actually continued on to Concord. Well, all of these men were waking up people along the road in all these different towns and telling them, go to Concord because the British are coming to get our ammunition that we have stored there. So I want you to take a good look at that map because this started at about 10 p.m. on April 18th, and this is what was happening with the British. Now the British, this is Boston, they also rowed across this part of water here, if you follow my mouse. Then when they got over here, they started marching on foot. This red line shows where they marched. And Paul Revere went this way, and he went around this way. William Dawes went down this way. And this was all happening at the same time, but the British didn't know about Paul Revere and William Dawes. So, at about 10 p.m., at around the same time that Paul Revere leaves, the British start to row across Boston Harbor. They unload their soldiers into these little boats. They cross the harbor. They get to the other side, and they start to march. Their plan was to march overnight, leave Boston at night, and arrive at Concord in the morning, and they would take the supplies and surprise the people of Concord. So that was their plan. But, as we just said, Paul Revere and William Dawes are riding their horses through the towns and warning the colonists that the British are coming. They wake up all these people. They're called the Minutemen or the Patriots. Those men grab their muskets, they jump on their horses, and they all start to head to Concord. Now, they take back roads. They go through the woods because they know the British are on the main road marching. And this is all happening overnight. This is a picture of what the colonists looked like. Now, the British were actual real soldiers with uniforms and fancy weapons and commanders. And the colonists really were not. They were just kind of a group of guys. It's called a militia. They were like practice volunteer soldiers. They did have somebody that was a leader, but it was not like a real general. But this is what they looked like. And they were also headed to Concord. So about 700 British soldiers began marching as soon as the boats crossed. And this is what they looked like. They were very serious looking and intimidating with these big weapons and these shiny brass buttons and bright red coats. And they march in lines, and they're very serious and very well-trained soldiers. So they're marching down the road, headed to Concord, about 700 of them. And in a town called Lexington, which is about 5 miles away from Concord. So the British soldiers are marching down the road and they get to this place called Lexington. And when the British soldiers walk into the town of Lexington, they see this group of about 70 Minutemen, patriots, standing in the town green. Now, all of those other men that I showed you pictures of were headed to Concord, but there was a group of them that stayed in Lexington. And they were clumped together, and as the British came into the town, they stood and they said, get out of here. This is our town. You're not coming through. So this is what the British look like. This is happening at about 5 a.m. in the morning. So the British have marched overnight down the long road between Boston and Lexington, And they come into the town. They see these men, and here's the British soldiers. Now, the leader of the British is a man named General Pitcairn. He gets on his horse and he tells the colonists, "Get out of here. We're going to march through. Your rebels, your troublemakers, get." But the colonists refused to leave. And so for a while, there was some yelling at each other across the lawn, because it's happening in the middle of like a big patch of lawn. And nobody knows exactly what happened. Historians have studied this, but somebody on one of the sides, either the British or the colonists, suddenly fired a shot. And when they fired the shot, this is a picture of what the colonists would have looked like, then everybody starts firing. So one gun goes off, and then everybody starts firing on both sides. And that instant is called the shot heard round the world. Now, that doesn't mean that it was so loud that everybody could hear it. But what it means is that this huge battle has now started, and it's going to change the world. So we'll come back to that later. But it's called the shot heard round the world. And it happened at about 5 a.m. in the morning in the town of Lexington, Massachusetts. And this is the first time that the British soldiers and the colonists are actually in a battle, because the Boston Massacre wasn't really quite a battle, and there were other problems, but this is the first time that there's actually a real battle. So this is 700 British versus about 70 colonists. And sadly, this is a painting of what happened. 8 colonists die, and you can see this big line of soldiers in the back, and this is the green, which is the lawn. And so after a little bit, it doesn't last very long, the leader of the colonists says, "We have to get out of here." So they grab their wounded and they all run away. That's called a retreat. So but sadly, 8 colonists die. So those colonists go back to their homes, and these British soldiers keep marching. And they keep marching on to Concord. Meanwhile, overnight, about 400 of those Minutemen who were woken up by Paul Revere and William Dawes have arrived in Concord. Now, the British don't know that. And they come to this bridge. This bridge is called Old North Bridge. It's still there. You can go and visit it. But on one side of the bridge over here, the grassy part, was where the 400 Minutemen, the patriots, the colonists, were waiting. And the British came up this road, and on either side of this bridge, the colonists were on one side, the British were on the other, and they were yelling at each other and aiming their weapons at each other. And then very soon, another battle begins. So the first one was at 5 a.m. in Lexington, and this one happens at about 9 a.m. in Concord, Massachusetts. So you can see the colonists all gathered up on this bridge, and then over here is where you see the smoke from the guns of the British. So these 400 men, who are not professional soldiers, get into a battle with 700 British soldiers. And the British are better prepared, they have better weapons, but they're having a hard time with these colonists. So pretty soon, the British captain says, "We have to get out of here. We're going to go back to Boston." Because the British weren't really planning on shooting and fighting the colonists. They wanted to get their ammunition, but they really didn't want to engage in a battle. So their leader decides this has gone really badly. And he turns his men around and he says, "We have to head back to Boston." So these British soldiers start to march on that same road back to Boston. But as they're marching back, they're trying to get out of there as quickly as they can. Colonists are hiding. The colonists leave Concord and they run through the woods and down the road, and they are hiding behind the trees, behind fences, behind rocks, they're behind barns, and they're hiding, and they pop out and they fire on the British. This is from a reenactment. As the British are walking down the road, and they surprised the British. And this picture shows, if you look closely, you can see the faces of these men. They're very scared. And sadly, this one is probably injured here because the Patriots were popping out and surprising them. So the British, the whole walk back, the 20-mile walk back to Boston, kept getting attacked by these colonists who were hiding in the woods. And that's the end of the battle. So that's called the Battles of Lexington and Concord. And the colonists defeat the British. And this shocked the entire world. I think it probably shocked the colonists themselves, but it shocked the whole world because the British were super powerful and very well trained. And the colonists were kind of like just a bunch of farmers with some muskets, and they kind of were organized, but not really. And they weren't really experienced soldiers. And everyone was shocked that they were able to defeat the British. And this is the first battle of the American Revolution. And now these two groups, the British on one side and the colonists on the other, are fighting each other, even though just 10 years before they fought together in the French and Indian War. And that is the start of the American Revolution.